Hello. We are going to knock this one out quick today. So last time we were on number 27 of creating the new global organization. And so we're going to start on 28 and we're going to knock it out real quick. I'm thinking we'll go to 54 and we'll do a short one today. We'll do this, maybe we'll do this in 7 parts too. I was born 02/17/77, 1977, so there's a lot of 7s in that date. I'm an Aquarius and I'm a dragon. If I was born the next day, I actually would have been a snake, but I made it technically 76 was the year of the dragon. I was born in 77, but the end of the year of the dragon ended in 77. So 28 of the Notice of Understanding, Sovereignty, and Declaration of Rights. I believe this is part 5 today. And so we'll go at 28 of the Declaration of Rights. Whereas out of necessity, compassion, love, and in the best interest of peace for all those who believe that only the laws of man apply to all, we, through the different interfaces those system provides, allow those individuals to cede to those jurisdictions without the people of this state of Atlantis, consenting or ceding our jurisdiction over to those interfaces / systems or relinquishing our sovereign status. And 29, whereas it is understood that the United States of America is no longer a biblical common law jurisdiction that upholds the law of the land, but operates under admiralty in the UCC and securitizes court cases by using 3 to 6 bonds and the persons as security on those bonds, and warehouses the people as securities to help pay off the bankruptcy and to fund wars. U.S. citizens have no right to have no right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, or property except what is granted to them. They have no privacy, peace, and no ability to travel freely in public without harassment or intimidation. 30. Whereas it is understood that equality before the law is paramount and mandatory. And 31. Whereas it is understood that a statute, act, code, title, bylaw, or ordinance is defined as a legislated rule of society which is be given the force of law by consent only, has a copyright in the United Kingdom, and is no longer restricted in scope and applicability by the Constitution of the United States of America and common law. And 32. Whereas it is understood that a society is defined as several people joined by mutual consent to deliberate, determine, and act for the common good. And 33. Whereas it is understood that the only form of government recognized as lawful in the United States of America is a Republican one. But they now run a democracy, and that's why the people of the state of Atlantis have chosen their international right to self-government. And 34. Whereas it is understood that representation requires mutual consent. And 35. Whereas it is understood that in the absence of mutual consent, neither representation nor governance can exist. And 36. Whereas it is understood that those who have a social security number are assumed to be employees / agents of the federal government and are thus thought to be bound by statutes created by the federal government. And 37. Whereas it is understood that it is lawful to abandon or expatriate one's SS number and revoke consent. And 38. Whereas it is understood that human beings, as having unalienable rights and who have lawfully revoked consent, do therefore exist free of statutory restrictions, obligations, and limitations. And 39. Whereas the people of this state have a sovereign soul, shall be free to self-govern. And 40. Whereas it is understood that any action for which one can apply for and receive a license must itself be a fundamentally lawful action. And 41. Whereas the people of the state of Atlantis are a spiritual, competent, self-governing, self-aware people of the majority and operate with full responsibility and are not children. We do not see the need to ask permission to engage in lawful and peaceful activities, especially from those who claim limited liability. And 42. Whereas it is understood that corporations are legal fictions and require contracts to claim authority to control over other parties. And 43. Whereas it is understood that legal fictions lack a soul and cannot exert any control over those of us who are blessed and operate with respect to that knowledge, as only a fool would allow a soulless fiction to dictate one's own actions. And 44. Whereas it is understood that people have a right to the unrestricted use of property without having to pay for the use of and enjoyment thereof. And 45. Whereas it is understood that a summons is merely an invitation to attend, and those issued by the corporation known as the United States or any of its agencies or instrumentalities creates no obligation or dishonor if ignored. And 46. Whereas it is understood that peace officers, who may also play the role of policy enforcement officers, have a duty to distinguish between statutes and law, and those who attempt to enforce statutes against people are in fact breaking the law. And 47. Whereas it is understood that people have the power to refuse interaction or cooperation with peace officers who have not observed the commitment of a felony or breach of peace. And 48. Whereas it is understood that all authority possessed by elected representatives must inherently be derived from those who elect the representatives. And 49. Whereas it is understood that if people have the right to empower representation by casting a vote, then they are empowered to present or represent themselves. And 50. Whereas it is understood that the right of empowerment does not derive from any government, otherwise it would be impossible for a government to revoke it. And 52. Whereas it is understood that the United States is a corporation operating in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy and thus still allowed to trade. And 53. Whereas it is understood that a birth within the geographical boundaries of the United States represents a single share in the United States corporation. And 54. Whereas it is understood that a statute being defined as a legislated rule of a society within the United States is in fact a rule of the said United States corporation, statute merchant, SF Standard Form 273, SF Standard Form 274, SF Standard Form 275. Also Forms 23, 24, I think it's 24, 25, and 25A also. 55, we'll go a little longer. Whereas it understood that the rules of a corporation are limited in applicability to those who are agents of the said corporation. And 56, where it is understood that all officers, agents, etc. of the United States corporation, also known as public servants, are thought to be required to make an oath to uphold the common law and the Constitution of the United States. And 57, where it is understood that in the United States, under the law of nations, people have the right to form their own government and revoke and deny consent to be represented and thus govern. And 58, whereas it is understood that if anyone revokes or denies consent, exists free of government control and statutory restraints. And 59, whereas it is understood that a claim of right, declaration of rights, and a charter, constitution, articles establishes a lawful excuse. 60, whereas it is understood that if one has lawful excuse, one may choose not to obey a court, tribunal, statute, act, code, or order. And 61, whereas it is understood that the people of the state of Atlantis have the right to create their own government and lawfully revoke consent and exist free of other state statutory restrictions, obligations, and limitations. And 62, whereas it is understood that we, the people, are acting peacefully within community standards, would not in that capacity breach the peace nor act contrary to biblical common law. 63, whereas it does, I think we'll end there because now we're getting into public transportation and commerce. So that's it. We've gone up to 63 of the Notice of Understanding, Sovereignty, and Declaration of Rights. That was a quickie. I will see you next time.